Hello and welcome to this special series on population studies. Today we are talking about gender dimensions of environmental policies and programs. 70% of 1.3 billion people in developing countries living on less than $1 a day are women. Therefore, it follows that energy poverty is a problem that has a disproportionate effect on women because they are responsible for supplying their families with food, fuel and water, often without the benefit of basic modern infrastructure. Lack of energy for households needs limits women's ability to take care of themselves. Without access to convenient, affordable fuels for cooking and heating, women have to spend large amounts of time and physical energy obtaining traditional fuels and agricultural wastes to hot waters and meals. At the same time, women in rural areas often have to grow and process their own food and transport heavy loads without any motorized equipment. If they do not have running water or motorized pumps for their homes, women also have to spend time each day gathering water from taps or possibly polluted wells, rivers or springs. In low income homes, women often spend many hours a day near an open fire for cooking meals. As a result, they are exposed to harmful level of gases, particles and dangerous compounds. Indoor air pollution is responsible for more than 1.6 million deaths per year due to pneumonia, asthma, bronchitis, tuberculosis, lung cancer and heart disease. Although women always play an important role to manage environment due to their traditional family roles, they are absent in decision making mechanisms for environmental politics. Government and other actors were invited to analyze policies regarding to their effects on women and men and promote a gender perspective in all policies and programs before decisions are taken. The concept of gender mainstreaming has comprised an equal representation of women with men in decision making institutions as well. Researchers indicate that women continue not to exist in any planned environmental policy actions including legislation and programs, and moreover environmental politics haven't been prepared by using gender lenses. However, it wouldn't be possible to provide sustainable development if the role of women in environmental decision making is not taken into consideration. In many international human rights instruments included Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, gender equality is accepted as inalienable and integral part of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and it is essential to achieve sustainable development, peace and security as well. It is also important to emphasize that the concept of gender is not only relating with women. Gender refers to both women and men and relations between them. Since Beijing Conference in 1995, gender equity was used as a terminology to provide balance between women and men. Gender equity denotes an element of interpretation of social justice, usually based on tradition, custom, religion or culture. However, advancement of women is unacceptable by the term of gender equity. During the Beijing Conference, it was agreed that the term equality would be utilized. Gender equality means that the right, responsibilities and opportunities of individuals will not depend on whether they are born male or female. Equality does not mean the same as. In other words, Promotion of gender equality does not mean that women and men will become the same. Equality involves ensuring that the perceptions, interests, needs, roles, responsibilities, and priorities of women and men will be given equal weightage in planning and decision making. There is a dual rationale for promoting gender equality. First, equality between women and men, equal rights, opportunities and responsibilities is a manner of human rights and social justice. And secondly, equality between women and men is also a precondition for sustainable development. The perceptions, interests, needs and priorities of both women and men must be taken into consideration not only as a matter of social justice, they are necessary to enrich development processes. Office of Special Advisor on Gender Issues and the Advancement of Women, UN, August 2001. Some results which have obtained from field studies are also shown that gender equality is the fundamental issue regarding to economic efficiency. For instance, the same opportunities regarding to required agricultural raw material and vehicles are given to the women farmers in Kenya as men farmers. In another dramatic example from Tanzania, if reducing time that required for to spend household cares, women coffee and banana growers increase household cash incomes by 10%, labor productivity by 15% and capital productivity by 44%. Importance of gender mainstreaming in environmental policy making. Women use and manage natural resources in order to perpetuate their families and communities. Women manage and rehabilitate natural resources, and so they play a key role to provide sustainable development. Although they create direct effects on the quality and sustainability of the life for today's and future generations, women are not available in political and decision making processes. However, if exploitation of nature and women is not ended, it is not possible to provide sustainable development. This conceptual change in gender equality brings back gender mainstreaming strategies. Gender mainstreaming does not entail to develop different development projects for women. Gender mainstreaming entails to put women's components within existing projects, programs and policies. In order to reflect gender perspective on policies, following questions should be answered. What are the impacts of the decisions on women and men? How is the resource allocation for women and men? What are the roles of women and men regarding to policy development, implementation and monitoring? How the norms and standards are determined? Women in Development approach, that is WID. In the framework of Women in Development approach, women are considered as a distinct and vulnerable group in projects and programs, where women's knowledge has been utilized in areas related to family or community health, ensuring medical plans and food security, and environmental conservation, the protection of forest products. This approach also ignores the required strategies needed to pursue the various objectives involved in the use and management of environmental resources that will require the contribution of women and men alike. This approach first came to prominence in the early 1970s. Research and information collected throughout the UN Decade for Women, that is 1975 to 85, highlighted the existing poverty and disadvantage of women and their invisibility in the development processes. different policy responses and intervention focused on women as a separate group, resulting in women's concern being added on and peripheral to the mainstream development efforts. WID policies have proposed actions targeted only to women rather than integrating them fully into the project activities. WID policies and interventions have concentrated on women's productive work. The failure to make an explicit link to women's reproductive work has often added to women's workload. Gradually, it was recognized that an approach that focused on women in isolation was inadequate and not sustainable because it did not take into account the overall project objectives or integrate women fully into their implementation. Moreover, it did not address or change unequal gender relations in various social and economic settings. However, there are shortcomings to this approach because by WID, women are not available in the use and management of environmental resources. Many policymakers tend to follow WID approach to development discourses and programs. The gender and development, that is GAD or GID perspective, emerged in the late 1980s as response to the failure of WID projects. Aims of GAD are to provide qualitative and long-lasting changes in the women's social status. The gender and development GAD focuses on social, economic, political and cultural forces that determine how men and women participate in, benefit from and control over project resources and activities differently. This approach shifts the focus from women as a group to the socially determined relations between women and men. GAD refers the term of gender instead of women. It is also taking into account participation of men as well as women's. However, several key analytical principles relating to gender roles and practical and strategic gender needs, as well as to control over resources and decision making in the household, civil society and the state were determined and translated into tools and techniques for a gender planning process at the policy, program and project level. Gender mainstreaming in environmental policies. According to UNEP, the discussion of gender and environment is based on two percepts. The first one implies that gender mediates human environment interactions and use, knowledge and assessment of environmental issues. According to the second percept, gender roles, responsibilities, expectations and norms predict human environmental relationship. A gender sustainable development perspective should be infused with a commitment to change the cultural values. As such, UNEP feels that the issue of concern should be gender and environment rather than women and environment. The two broad principles noted above manifest themselves in a variety of environmental relations and interactions. An analysis conducted by Castaneda and Martin in the Country Analysis Report for CEDAW points out that the inclusion of sustainable development and the environment in the gender agenda is still weak in many countries. While some reports presented sex disaggregated data to contextualize gender gaps in rural and urban contexts, most of the reports did not. The situation is not better at international level as well. When we did revision on global indices that measure progress in gender equality in different policy areas, the number of indices that show the advancement of women in relation to environmental and development concerns, women and men have different gender-based roles and responsibilities in their own lives, families, households, and communities. They have different knowledge of, access to, and control over natural resources, and different opportunities to participate in decisions regarding natural resource use. Understanding women's and men's relationships to the environment plays an important role in the developing solutions for more sustainable use of natural resources. Ignoring gender distorts the understanding of human impacts on the environment. Public participation in decision making. Now, public participation in environmental management is increasingly seen as a vital component of environmental policies. Several major United Nations conferences in the 1990s, including the Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 and Fourth World Conference on Women that was held in Beijing in 1995, acknowledged women's contribution to environmental management and proposed action to strengthen women's role in decision making. Yet women's involvement in the formulation, planning and execution of environmental policy remains low at all levels, from local positions to the ranks where national and international environmental policies are determined. When women do contribute to environmental management, it is often at the local level. Women in many countries, for example in Ukraine, Bangladesh, Russia and Mexico, have been involved in planning the management of freshwater resources. They have come together in women's group and cooperatives to mobilize communities and resources to highlight urgent problems in industrial areas, as well as to help conserve and protect their supplies of clean, accessible water. This limited participation in decision making means that women's perspective, needs, knowledge and proposed solutions are often ignored. In addition, failure to take account of women's and men's activities and to include both in the decision making process can lead to policies that criminalize women's activities without changing their behavior. For example, in El Salvador, community leaders placed restrictions on collecting timber in coastal areas and fishing in estuaries in an effort to conserve the fragile mangrove system. In this area, most men fish in open seas while women collect fuelwood and fish in the estuaries and along the shoreline. Women were not consulted when the ban was discussed, yet they were most affected by the restrictions. Valuing household survival over possible penalties, women continued to fish and gather fuelwood secretly. The impacts of environmental degradation on women and men. Not only do women and men differ in the ways they use and manage environmental resources, they are also differentially affected by the degradation of natural resources. Deforestation, water scarcity, soil degradation, and exposure to agricultural and industrial chemicals and organic pollutants affects women and men in varying ways. Now, gender responsive environmental policies and programs. Gender responsive environmental policies and programs are those that seek to achieve environmental outcomes while explicitly taking into account both men's and women's opinions, needs and interests. Such policies derive from social, health and ecological research that provides a more comprehensive picture of the impact of humans on the environment and the impacts of environmental change on people. A number of countries have taken initiatives to incorporate a gender perspective into environmental policies and programs by taking the following action: collecting and analyzing sex disaggregated information. Collecting sex disaggregated information is a first step towards developing gender responsive policies and programs. Data that provide information on women's and men's resource use, access to resources, and participation in environmental decision making contributes to sound policies. Currently, sex disaggregated information is rarely used in national environmental policies or programs. However, some agencies have begun collecting disaggregated information at the local level. In Brazil, a conservation organization used a stakeholder assessment to identify people's needs, design appropriate interventions, and later evaluate the effect of policies and programs in the Jau National Park. Interviews used separate questionnaires for women and men along with other instruments, including a 24-hour recall questionnaire and activities profile to better understand residents' interaction with the environment in the park. The government of Tunisia also combined data gathered at the local level with the more standard survey information to design a plan of action for integrating women into the country's 9th 5-year plan. Now, strengthening women's involvement in environmental decision making. Worldwide, women are poorly represented in governments and decision making bodies. This lack of representation limits women's influence over public policies and programs. Women need official channels to reflect their needs and to have a voice in environmental policy decisions. Several countries have done this by setting aside seats to ensure women's participation in environmental management and decision making bodies. In the 1990s, number of countries including India, Uganda, Brazil, and Philippines formally set aside a percentage of seats on national and local bodies for women. In Jamaica, changes in recruitment strategies have led to an increase in women leadership in natural resource and environmental management. As a result, women make up more than a third of the forestry department's technical staff. In Tunisia, women hold 19% of senior management positions in the Ministry of Environment. Issuing Gender Policy Declaration. Commitment to addressing gender concerns must be reflected at the highest level. Several governments around the world have taken steps to incorporate a gender perspective into their national environmental policies. Gender policy declarations are important because they demonstrate a government's intent to address gender concerns, provide a reference document for technical staff that are working on national policies and programs, and provide the basis for action to develop the capacity of both women and men to address gender concerns. Uganda's National Environmental Plan, adopted in 1995, supports using participatory approaches and gender analysis for environmental planning. A section of Malawi National Environmental Policy calls for integration of gender, youth, and child concerns into environmental planning and decisions at all levels. In the Philippines, a gender and development focal point was set up in Division of Environment and Natural Resources to serve as a catalyst for gender responsive planning and programming. Signing international agreements building on the momentum of the UN conferences in the 1990s will be key to translating international commitments into concrete actions. UN conference documents, often called a platform, program, or plan of action, represent a common policy statement among all of the nations that participate in the process. Conference agreements can be a catalyst for national action. They can influence government policies through international peer pressure. Advocates can use the documents to put pressure on governments to fund or approve actions that support the agreements, and the goals and benchmarks in the documents can serve as tools for monitoring national progress and encouraging action. The 5-year review of the Fourth World Conference on Women in 2000 in New York found that while significant progress had been made in carrying out 1995 Accord, major obstacles remain to achieving greater economic opportunities and autonomy for women. The 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, South Africa, provides an important opportunity to review progress and lessons learned in translating the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development's platform of action into equitable and sustainable solutions. Now we come to the conclusions. The different roles and responsibility of women and men are closely linked to environmental change. This is true both for how women and men affect the environment through their economic and household activities, and how the resulting environmental changes affect people's well-being. Understanding these gender differences is an essential part of developing policies aimed at both better environmental outcomes and improved health and well-being. Experience and research suggest a number of actions policymakers and planners can take to improve the integration of gender concerns into environmental planning. Improve data collection on women's and men's resource use, knowledge of access to and control over resources, and opportunities to be involved in decision making, train staff and management on the relevance of gender issues to environmental outcomes. Establish procedures for incorporating a gender perspective in planning, monitoring and evaluating environmental projects. Ensure opportunities for women to participate in decisions about environmental policies and programs at all levels, including roles as designers, planners, implementers and evaluators. Foster commitment at all levels, local, national and international, that the integration of gender concerns into policies and programs leads to more equitable and sustainable development. Continued commitment and increased capacity at all levels of society are essential for achieving these goals. Thank you so much for watching.